Enjoy a seat at the table for great conversation and good company.
Welcome to And Good Company. I'm Sarah Fiedelholtz. We all know a great dinner party isn't really about the food. It's about the people seated around the table engaging in lively discussions. And Good Company gives you a seat at the table to enjoy smart and engaging conversations as they happen. I am pleased to be in the company of Cedric Walker, who is the senior pastor of Joshua's Temple Missionary Baptist Church and the founder CEO of Joshua's Hand. Welcome.
Hey, Sarah, glad to be here.
So before we're going to discuss the fact that after 33 years in the ministry and as the founder and CEO of Joshua's Hand, and the community that you have developed and founded, you are retired.
Yes, ma'am.
So before we talk about that, I want to talk about Joshua's Hand and your vision and all that you have achieved. So first, can you tell me how you came up to develop Joshua's Hand and the significance of the name, both, I guess, for the church and then for the community program?
Okay. Joshua's Temple was birthed out of a very difficult time in my life. I had came back here from Memphis, Tennessee to assist my ailing father, who was a minister as well. He did it for like 53 years before he went home to be with the Lord. And as I was serving in Memphis, his health began to fail him, and I was flying back and forth helping him with his church and tending to mine as well. Eventually, I had to make a decision as to where I was going to be, and I decided that our legacy was enough for me to choose to come home. I've been in the church serving my entire life. My father, we didn't only have the church where we served, but he was a very entrepreneurial kind of fella. And he only had an 8th grade education, but he had a lot going for him. And
what was the church he had here?
Jerusalem Missionary Baptist Church.
And then, and what was his name?
Samuel Walker, Dr. Samuel Walker.
And what was his, what was he known for to give for the community?
He and Jesse White and Clyde Adams and Dr. Bledsoe and those guys played a major role in desegregating the school system here. We remember the battles with Lester Gryle and the marching and having battles with the KKK and crosses being burned in our front yard and our children having to go to school in the basements of the churches until we could get the schools integrated, and then the busing started and we have what we have today. And so
what did you learn from him, from your father and his work, that when you sort of came to create the Joshua's Temple, and what was it that, you like, what do you hear in your head from your father?
Self-sufficiency. My dad used to say things like, plan your work and work your plan. He'd say all kinds of, he dropped, nuggets of wisdom.
Walkerisms?
Walkerisms, yeah, we can call him that. He'd be like, nail it down before you start, nail one corner down before you start on another corner,
right.
And all kind of Walkerisms. He was a very wise guy, and he always knew how to get it done. He wasn't the most educated fella, and so he wasn't really accepted in a lot of circles because he didn't have the pedigree, but he was an achiever. I mean, he could get things done. He built the gym that's on the church now. He built that gym from his hospital bed. And he, when they finally got it built and he had come home from the hospital, they rolled him through in his wheelchair and he passed like the next week. That was the first time he had even gone in it. So he built it from, we owned a corner store, what they call C-stores now. Yeah, we owned one of those back in the 70s, gas station. We had like a 15-foot meat counter with a butcher where we had fresh vegetables shipped in twice a week. Anything you could get. This was on the corner of on the corner of Lafayette and Coleridge Street, 76. It used to be called Quick Pick.
Okay.
We had soft serve ice cream. you know, hot food. I mean, you name it, we had it in there. And on the weekend, barbecues, and there was a
So it also almost became like the community center.
like a community center. There was a arcade in the back for my friends and I, the kids in the neighborhood. So we, and then right down the street, my uncle, he owned a body and record service. He had a fleet of trucks that he used to do contract towing for the city of Fort Wayne. I had another uncle who was a pastor here. I had several of my uncles that had owned tree cutting businesses. So we were very entrepreneurial kind of family, yet we were very spiritual as well. There were like 4 pastors that came out on my dad's side. And then on my mom's side, there's about 3 or 4 pastors as well. On my grandmother's side, we had a bishop in the AME church.
Wow.
So very priestly.
So what happened to the Jerusalem church and the Quick Pick? What happened to all of those roots in the community?
Time, as you know, as we transitioned, and the doors were finally opened for African Americans, the church, actually, the black church, kind of got lost in transition because our major focus was, you know, to get our people liberated.
Right.
You know, to end segregation and racism, and that became that was Dr. King's, you know, legacy, and the major force behind his movement was the church.
Right.
And the majority of the black church was committed to making that happen. And so that became probably almost more important than discipleship, evangelism and discipleship. We didn't have to worry about evangelism because black people couldn't go to too many other places anyway. So the church became your community center.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. So that's why, so one of the things I'm interested in is, so when I first started coming to Fort Wayne, and people would talk to me about the African American community, the black community, and I'd be like, okay, where is it? Like, where can I go? Like, you know, if I wanted to experience, like if you came to Miami, I could tell you. Like if you wanted to go to Little Haiti, I could take you. You want to go to Little Havana, I could take you. You want to go to African American, you want soul food, I could take you. So here I was like, where is the African American community? Like, and everybody's like, well, it's all over. And I said, well, okay, so is it in the church? Like, you know, I thought that a lot of community, because of like with Dr. King, would be in the black churches.
Yeah.
And then I learned no, because there's been a lot of fractions, and then people split off and they set up their own churches, so there's not necessarily as much of those real mainstays in the community. And then of course you've got millennials now, none of them want to organize religion. And but one of the things that I felt is that in order to build community, you need a place.
Yes.
Like even the Quick Pick. I mean, you need somewhere that's the gathering place for the community.
Very important.
And so, I mean, now hopefully with Tara Brantley with Urban League, because she's got an incredible campus there in the library, maybe that could be the place. But so did you feel that, like when you start to look at, for Joshua, that there needed to be this place, you know, or because really the programs that you do, like Joshua's work and Joshua, are really community, what a community center outreach would do, right?
Well, I tell you, I think I can help you with that. I think I can give you a perspective on that. And the reason why we're so dispersed, you got to remember that the black church, especially the Black Baptist Church, it was the center of African American community, the African American community.
Right.
And the generation before me, well, my pastor, you can just about assume that I am like the last part of the generation of that pastorate, because they were still pastoring. So when I started,
like your father's generation,
my father's generation,
because he would have been the generation of Dr. King, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
So
you're the disciples. They're still.
We kind of missed a generation there, because they stayed a very long time.
Okay.
Because of the way things were, and you know, the gap in education and all of that. So they stayed a little bit longer than leadership would have normally stayed.
Okay.
And so I probably shouldn't have been in their era, but I ended up being in their era. I started so young, and I spent a lot of time with them, right? And so they were like, you could almost, before my dad's generation of churches, the only black churches that were here were, Pilgrim, Union, and then over here on Jefferson Street, I forget the name of, right across the street from the funeral home, Turner Chapel.
Okay.
Turner Chapel. Those were the major three. And so all of the black people came to Fort Wayne and they went to those three churches, right?
Right. But Pilgrim and the one that you're talking about across from the cemetery, those are
across from the funeral home.
the funeral home.
Yeah.
Are
Turner Chapel is the oldest black church in Fort Wayne.
But is that in Southeast? Or?
We would probably call that Midtown.
Okay.
Because my dad's church was right around the corner from that. But that's where most African Americans were during that time.
Right, because where you live now, we were talking about the neighborhood that you live now is, what is it called?
Woodhurst.
Woodhurst. That was a very Jewish.
Very
because
Jewish.
of where the temple is. So really, we have to So the African Americans didn't necessarily.
We started migrating towards in that direction. We used to the neighborhood that I live in now. We used to go there to shovel snow, rake leaves, to make money, extra money there.
Because all the old Jewish people needed.
Jewish people lived there, and we started migrating. My family was like the second, maybe the third black family in the community that I grew up in. I grew up on the corner of Esmond and Barr, which is only 2 blocks from Pontiac Street. Right. So at that time, that was a largely white community.
Right, because, and then traditionally this has happened in cities all over.
All over the place.
What happens is that in some ways the Jews had to live in communities where, because they weren't welcome. Right. So they lived in these communities.
Their own community.
And then as they got more professionally established and stuff, then they wanted to move to suburbs or areas, for better areas.
That's the reason why I took you back, because the reason why, so that you could get a picture of what's happening. Because the question you asked was, you would normally be able to go into a certain area, and that's where you would find people, but that's not here. But the reason why is because we're really like only in the second generation of African American people. So when we come here in Fort Wayne, some would say third. Technically, it would be third.
Right.
But when we, Generation X, I think we're probably one of the most unique generations that will ever
Well, we're also, so I'm a Generation
You're
X.
Generation X too.
So we also are the smallest generation.
The smallest generation.
Because what happened was, if you remember, there was the baby boomers.
Exactly.
Then there was us. And then there was Generation Y, which was the second largest until the millennials. So, but Generation X was the smallest, and we were the ones that were written off as like the slackers, and we weren't going to do anything. And but we're the ones who are like the sandwich generation, and we're picking up, and we're the ones that are taking causes, and so
You're exactly right. You know what I mean? And by that time, civil rights had opened up, right?
Okay.
And black folk were like people who had been in prison. So you'll have all these values and dreams and things that you think you want to do until you're free. So when you're free, all of the distractions, all of your deepest desires, even the things that you never thought you would do, you probably end up, experimenting and all that, because it happens, I think, every generation. You can see that happens. But when you talk about, that's what happened to Israel.
Right.
When they came out of Egypt, they were holy. They were straight cut. I mean, they were ready to go to the promised land until they got on the other side of the Red Sea.
Well, and until Moses sort of went up the mountain, so they were like, well, he's not here, and then they had a party.
They realized that they were free.
Right. And but then God had to do when they saw him worshiping at the golden calf and everything, then they had to walk for 40 years because he had to get rid of that generation. Like he had to get rid of any of that so that they would be ready to go.
So the next generation would learn from the past generation.
Would learn from really the previous generation, not the generation that worshipped at the golden calf. They sort of needed to like.
Well, he kind of killed those off.
Right, exactly. Well, that's what he did in the 40 years. So it's really okay. So that's very interesting. So then that explains why the diaspora of the African American community in Fort Wayne.
In Fort Wayne, and it's coming. I believe if God doesn't come, if Jesus doesn't come back first, we will see African Americans gather in spaces that they can call their own, and that may be happening in Southeast now from a more socioeconomic perspective. Now, Joshua's Temple was started. It was first New Joshua. When I
Okay.
left my dad, when I came and served him for a year, he decided he wouldn't retire. So when he decided he wouldn't retire in the Baptist church, there was no levels of leadership. There was one pastor. There was not a pastor of
That's
the
like
youth.
rabbis. There's one.
There's just one,
Yeah.
and that's it.
You one and
know?
done until he's
Until
done,
he's
and
done,
then yeah.
and that's it.
So
And
he wouldn't step aside for you.
Right.
Okay.
You know, first he thought he wanted to do it, and then he changed his mind. So I'm doing now with Joshua's Temple what I came here to do with him 23 years ago.
Okay, and so I wanted to ask you about the name, and
Yes.
even New Joshua.
So New Joshua, it was, see, I saw my dad, we was talking earlier, you said, see, I saw them as the Moses generation pretty
Okay,
much.
okay.
And they brought us out of, bondage.
Okay.
And so there needed to be another generation that would take us over into this proverbial promised land, where
Right,
we could
okay.
start taking advantage of the promise, not only the promises that God made to each believer, but the constitutional promises that America had laid out as well.
Okay.
And so I was looking to start. I was looking to start a movement. Actually,
Okay.
that's what New Joshua really was, of movement. And it came. I was in a hurt place because I had given up a really good ministry to come back, and I
And
thought
then
I
your
would.
dad wasn't gonna, and then also you got some freedom.
And
so,
then I got some
right.
freedom, and I had some success because the last two churches that I had pastored, I went in both of them, and the Lord used my ministry to build them up, left them debt-free with more members in programming and what have you. So this time I said, I'm not going to go into an organized church. We're going to start from scratch.
Okay.
And we will be like Joshua
So okay, so the
and
idea.
the children of Israel
Right,
going
but-
into the
Okay,
promised land.
but there's more that's important to that. So
Yeah.
so you had Moses who led them out, and
Yes.
then after they were in the desert for 40 years,
Yes.
God said to Moses, you're not going to the promised land.
Right.
You may have delivered them, but you're not. And so there's this whole idea of Moses who places his hand on Joshua to sort of anoint him as the new leader to take them into the promised land.
Yes.
So in a sense, if you refer to your father's generation as Moses, so then you in essence are Joshua and give a hand, but you're actually, if you think about new Joshua, so then what you're doing is you're placing your hand on the next generation.
On the next generation.
To build that community.
To build that community, because if you can remember what Joshua and his generation did, they went and conquered the land.
Right.
They did. They went out and they fought battles that needed to be fought.
Right.
And then at the end of his term, remember, he gave them a choice. He
Right.
says, you could choose the gods on that side of the flood or this side, but choose ye this day what God you would serve.
And then I was joking with you before because you created the Temple Church in 2000 and Joshua's Hand in 2013, and I was joking with you because now you're sort of like Moses because you've been doing this, even though you've been in the ministry for 33 years, you've been doing this really for 20 plus years here.
Yes.
But now you're retiring, so you're like Moses, where you're seeing the fruits of your labor, like everything that you've endured over the 20 years to help build Southeast and build neighborhood and create opportunities, which we're going to talk about.
Yes.
But you're not going. Like, you're seeing the fruit, like the promised land, but you're not going because you're moving to Houston.
Yes.
So I was sort of saying to you when I was researching, and I was thinking, well, he's like Moses now. So it's even foreshadowing, like you didn't know this 20 years ago when you came up with the name of that. Even the foreshadowing of you being Moses. Have you thought about that? Like, because I was wondering, like, why now? Like, can't you, like, wouldn't you want to wait 5 years to really deliver what your intent and see your vision really realize? Like, why do you have to be Moses now?
Because it really isn't about me, and it never was about me. When we started Joshua's Temple back in 2000, for the next straight 10 years, we prayer walked from Broadway to Rudisill to Wayne Trace to Tillman Road, every street and alley, every year.
And what is a prayer walk?
That's where we would send groups of people out 2 by 2, and we'd walk those streets and we'd pray. And we wouldn't make it a public thing, because the Word of God says when you pray, go into your closet and the Lord will reward you openly.
Okay.
So we don't believe in making a lot of public displays about what's happening with us and God. I don't think you have to make a display, because God, He'll get His glory on His own. And what we do, we just walk and pray, 2 people on each block or what have you. And if we saw anyone, we talk about, if we could be of service or invite them to church or what have you. But we did that for 10 years, asking God to give us direction. Why are we here? What do you want us to do? And out of that came Joshua's hand.
Okay.
And we saw Joshua's hand now being the hand of the church of the kingdom of God, from a very practical perspective and not so much spiritual, though everything is born out of our spirituality and our spiritual principles. That we had been known often as black folk as being very spiritual but not getting much done.
Right. It's sort of like,
that's what we were accused of.
Sort of like you pray like to God.
We do a lot of praying, we do a lot of singing, a lot of worship, a lot of shouting,
but
having
you
good
gotta
church,
get down
but we're not getting much
Right.
done. But a lot of people don't understand, we still didn't. Opportunities have been so challenged for African Americans.
Well, they still are,
and
right?
People like to downplay that, but you cannot downplay a couple of 100 years of slavery. And science now proves how trauma goes from one generation to the next generation. And people keep asking questions, and they'll say, well, I just wonder why they can't. Well, walk in our shoes and walk in the Jews' shoes.
Right.
You understand? And you would see, and we just happened to have a hard road to plow, as my dad would say, but we continue to plow it. And I wanted to produce a practical solution. People, in our community were saying, well, they never do anything for our community. They never do anything for our community. Well, I was raised, as I shared with you, from a very entrepreneurial, and we always believe in doing for ourselves.
Well, that was the Jewish way.
We just did it ourselves.
You had to do it yourself.
We opened our own stores. We had our own church. We had our own houses. We owned everything that we had. My dad and his brothers, they came from a very poor upbringing in Alabama. And so when they came here and they saw opportunity, they dug in and they just started building businesses and building community amongst themselves. And that's what we learned. And they never waited for white people to just do things for them. And I'm not saying that this is not a protest or anything like that. They just didn't wait for the system to do for them. And I was raised that way. So when I started pastoring my church, my first church, actually, we were very innovative. When Rick Warren put out Purpose Driven Church back 30 years ago, 30-some years ago, almost 40 years ago.
Churches, right?
That's it kind of started that, you know what I mean? But Dr. Bieberstein over at Fort Wayne Bible College, they were teaching us, the purposes of, they just didn't call it the Purpose Driven Church, but worship, fellowship, discipleship, ministry, and missions. And so I started implementing that stuff in the church, the small church that I went in, and we just started growing, and things were happening then. So I never pastored a church that was not progressive.
Okay.
Because of the biblical principles that I put there. I haven't been a perfect person. However, God's principles never fail. I don't care who you are. Sinners can practice God's principle, and they will get fruit.
Well, I always say, what happened, regardless of what your religion, what happened to the 10 Commandments?
Right.
If we all just followed the 10 Commandments and the Golden Rule, we'd all be fine. There'd be no issues of religion and,
That would be nice if it wasn't for sin.
Well, we don't believe in sin, so we leave that for you guys.
Okay.
But, so talk about this whole idea of what you really did with Joshua's hands, this social, economic, and spiritual renaissance. And what did Joshua's hand do and continue to do?
Well, we did a demographic study to find out what was happening, because there were folks on the other side of that table saying, do for yourself what you got the opportunity to do. And so I was like, okay, so let's do. And I set out to start doing, we did a demographic study, and we saw that housing was an issue. We saw that early childhood development was an issue, and employment was an issue in Southeast Fort Wayne.
And wealth acquisition.
Wealth acquisition, because if you don't own homes, then you're not.
Well, that's housing. Okay.
You know what I mean? That's housing. So, so when we discovered that, then I put together a vision. Habakkuk chapter 2 says, write a vision, make it plain, so that they that read it will run with it, for the vision is for a certain season, and it shall surely come. And so I wrote it, made it plain, and I just started talking to people about it. Anybody who would listen, I just started talking to them about it. Obviously, God had given it to me off of Isaiah 61, where he says, Isaiah says, I'm anointed to preach the gospel to the poor, to heal the brokenhearted, set the captives free, recover sight to the blind, to set at liberty them that are bruised, to preach the acceptable year of our Lord. Mm-hmm. And then he went on to say that I will give them beauty for ashes. I'll give them the oil of joy for their sorrow, and the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness. He said, then they shall go on to rebuild new cities on old ruins. So, so you're familiar with that, right?
Well, for us, I mean, and partly why we're talking about this is because you and I were talking about the fact that the Jewish community is in Southeast, and there is a lot of similarity and strengths, and that one of the biggest supporters of civil rights were the Jewish community.
Exactly.
So we have an idea of tikkun olam, which is to heal the world.
To heal the world.
We were chosen to go out, and we needed to practice tzedakah, which is charity, but not charity, and that's but more philanthropy and giving back, and tikkun olam, to heal the world, so that everyone in the world would have a better place, not just us. Because it's all boats rise together. So it's very similar in that.
Exactly.
sense.
Well, it was a social economic I had read it all my life, but at this point in time, it came to me as a social economic message. Because Jesus picked up that same passage of scripture, his first message.
Wasn't he a carpenter?
Right.
So one of the first things you did.
He healed the sick, and he raised the dead, and he did all that. But his ministry was to people first. That was his ministry, to people first. Before there was any kind of talk of doctrine or anything like that, he went to heal the brokenhearted, set captives free, recover. He wanted to remind the Jews of who they were, whose they were, and the promises that God made to them, and that they didn't have to depend on. It didn't matter.
Well, it wasn't promises. It was a covenant. It was an agreement.
It was an agreement. Exactly.
Because God doesn't promise you something. It's a covenant of agreement. If you follow his laws, then you will benefit. But you have to do it.
Right.
So that's
what calls faith. That's what happened with Abraham.
Right.
It was a covenant agreement.
Right.
But that covenant was based on God's promise, so that's how faith works.
Right.
And faith is not faith without works. There has to be a work that substantiates the faith that you say that you have.
Okay.
We're really alike a whole lot.
Well, that's what you realize is that that's what I'm saying is there's so much more that people are similar if they really
they just stop.
Even if you think about, I've done a lot of programs about talking about neighborhoods. And if you really think about what everybody wants in the neighborhood, it's the same thing.
It's the same thing. Well, at the end of the day, I always tell everything there's only two things that, from the time God dealt with Abraham on, from Noah on, from actually Adam on, even when Jesus came on the scene, he's been saying the same thing. Love me and love one another.
Right.
That's it.
Right.
All the rest of it is semantics.
Right. We all just say it in different ways.
We just say it in different ways. The rest of it is semantics. It's love. That's the reason why Joshua works. When we, our Live program.
Yeah. So let's talk about so Joshua, because this is really important. So Joshua Works, you started in 2018.
I started Joshua Works in about 18.
So talk about what so Joshua's Hand was really about economic development and housing, and you built and you've started. You have this Posterity
Heights.
Okay, so let's just talk about Joshua's Hand. So you had Posterity Heights. Okay.
Right, and Posterity Heights, we started acquisitioning and rehabbing old homes, and we wanted to make sure that people had good, safe, decent, affordable housing. Right. But then that was going to be a long process.
Right.
And I had an opportunity to partner with a developer out of Indianapolis who had a tax credit, and we had a vision. And we had discovered the Scholar House in Kentucky, and he had looked at it as well. So we had started off, we were just going to do the Scholar House, but I had asked the city to give me stewardship of the 28 acres of land where it sits, and the city did it. I don't know if they really thought we could do anything with it, but we did get it off the ground. It would have been a $42 million project. We got phase 1 done, the Scholar House. Scholar House was designed for single parents who wanted to continue their higher ed education. We would provide for them wraparound services. That would be automobile, that would be transportation, I'm sorry.
Right.
Early childhood development.
Right.
That would be education, and then life development.
Right, because
That's
you
the
work
live.
with the individual investment accounts, right? That
We do-
help you.
we deal with all of that.
Because if you're working for workforce development,
Yes.
owning a car, owning a home,
Yeah.
owning a business, and I never remember what the fifth one is.
Well, it was workforce development, and we didn't know that's what it was.
Okay.
I was just doing, following my vision.
Right.
And I figured if we could empower people, right, and then plant them in the community, then others can eat off the fruit of their tree.
Right, because it's like they're the roots, and then
They would be the roots.
Right.
And so once I saw we had 28 acres of land and we only had, I said, well, we could do this. Well, why don't we, when I looked at prospering communities, now it's Posterity Heights, not prosperity, it's Posterity Heights.
Okay.
Because we were looking to deliver 2 generations out of poverty
Right,
at the
and
same
so
time.
that meant so you were trying to deliver the parents and the children. That's
Well,
what you meant
yeah,
by the 2
exactly.
generations?
Parents and the children. This was to be a legacy building, a generational kind of movement, socioeconomic movement.
Okay.
Posterity Heights was designed, but in order for a community to really work, you have to have those things that are necessary for us to be healthy.
Right.
So you need to have healthy food.
Right.
Health care.
Right.
You understand? I mean, financial agencies. You got to have education. You got to have all those things. If you don't have those things in the community, you are not going to.
You're not going to build a community.
You're not going to build a community.
No.
And so we were looking to build a microcosm of what community could be. As I looked at out west and out north and out and out even further out east, I'm like, okay, every time they rebuild a community, here are the things that they put in that community.
Well, not really, because a lot of them, I don't like these artificial neighborhoods that they create.
Well, I'm not talking about.
I look at like downtown, that kind of community, what you need to build.
I'm talking about what is substantive. What do human beings need?
Right.
They need their churches. They need education.
No, they need resources.
They need resources.
I always say,
exactly.
if you want to know where, when you want to redevelop a community, the things you need a grocery store and a dry cleaner, and then that's and then and a drugstore, and then you can build it from there.
You can build it from there.
So
but we need a little bit more than that because there's so many needs.
Well, no, you need. I mean, that's just the structural, but no, you need the resources.
You need the resources.
It doesn't.
And just because people may be poor or underserved, it doesn't mean that they shouldn't have an opportunity.
Right.
To realize their full potential.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
And they don't have to have a Neiman Marcus, or they don't have to have, even a J.C. Penney or Macy's in the community. But there need to be sufficient services, goods and services that help people become who they were meant to be. You know what I mean? And that was my aim. My aim was to build a community that would provide the resources for the people. Now, right in the center of that community, there would have been 120-some housing units. But then, as I said, there would have been the Three Rivers Credit Union had come on board. Parkview had come on board. We had a local grocer who had come on board.
So you really were going to create like a town center.
Just a town center.
Which would have all these resources.
But in the middle of that, there was going to be what we call the Life Development Resource Center.
Right.
And that would have been to keep reproducing good people.
Right.
All of the programs would keep coming out of that. It would have been a gathering space with a coffee shop, restaurant in there, an entrepreneurial center, and all of that. And the banking center would have been there, so that the folks could start developing relationships with the bank.
Okay.
And they're going through entrepreneurial programs, and they're going through the LIVE program, and they're learning how to manage life.
Right.
Their time, talent, treasure, team, temple. If they learn to manage that, and the best way to do that kind of thing is in community.
Right, because you need, well, and if you look at, in some
You gotta
ways,
have accountability.
well, if you think about it, like the Burmese community here,
Everybody stays in community.
but they've done really well.
Yes.
Their house ownership is more than double African American. But this goes back to my point of place.
Yes.
Of you, because you build community and you rely on each other and their support, and you have people you can, and then they sort of live their, they live that life.
Exactly.
So where is it now? What's happening with Posterity Heights now? Is it still? I mean,
we're not on that project anymore. The city decided that they felt we didn't have the capacity to continue. We disagreed. We strongly disagreed because we had Wygan as our GC. We had Design Collaborative. They were our architects.
Right.
We had Barnes and Thornburg, where they were our legal team.
So when
Chuck
did the city
Cedric was our
decide?
lead
Yeah.
investor. We had Parkview. We had all of them, and the city decided they felt like we didn't have the capacity.
when was that?
That happened over a year ago.
And so now, though, but now they're doing another development, right? In that
Yeah.
McKinney, that's the Victory? What is it? Is that the same area?
It's.
So is that partly why you sort of decided like it's time to move on? Is that you had this, not that it was pulled out from under you, but sort of like. I mean, is that part of the impetus of? Because I mean, you're young. I mean, you're 56 years old, right?
55. I'll be 56.
I mean, you're very young. So, in trying to understand why you felt like the time is now, and because, like I said, there's all this happening.
Here's the deal. At the risk, Sarah, everybody's been kind of wondering, and I've been very quiet. At the risk of sounding like I'm belly aching, or complaining, or pulling the race card, or any of that, because that's what a lot of people end up doing who don't look like me.
Right.
If I start talking about it, then it sounds like I'm pulling a race card, or I'm being, they're being unfair, and what have you. So we'll just let it be whatever it is, and they can call it whatever they want to call it, but at the end of the day, we didn't break any laws. Nobody misused any dollars. We had #1 development team that could have finished that project, and we would have had, finally, minorities would have had ownership, a large part of ownership, equity in a $42 million project, which we have still yet to be able to achieve in Southeast or any other part of Fort Wayne. While we're talking a lot of diversity and inclusion, that's cool that we can work here or work there or buy a house here, but if we don't actually have any equity of ownership outside of home ownership, where we actually own businesses and we can get the loans and we can get the support that we need to be able to build the kind of businesses that employ people.
Right.
And not just mom and pop stores, but real businesses that employ people where where we can actually have some equity. And so
the Village Premier, which is this housing,
yes,
so that's a developer where the community is not going to have equity.
we won't have equity in that, not as far as I know. Now, if we will, I could be wrong, but I don't see where. We were established so that our deal was established so that we would be able to pay our investors back,
right?
And that we would actually have ownership and equity, because that's how you
build wealth.
And that's how you build community.
Right.
And that's how you actually really get a voice.
Right.
And people wonder what happened to the voices that we used to have. Well, back in the day, those people, the average black family, owned more than one house or home or what have you. And then when the Industrial Revolution took place, and then this big thing about you should either go to college or this, that, and the other, and what have you. Well, many people, many didn't take up their fathers' and mothers' corner stores and what have
Right.
you. But there wasn't hope for that either, because the Walmarts and everything.
Well, that's what happened with the Jewish community.
Exactly.
Because the biggest community, the jobs the Jews did here in Fort Wayne were the jobs that nobody wanted. They were the peddlers who became retailers. And they were really the junk collectors who turned it into scrap metal. And then they didn't want their children to do that, or as the consolidation, there wasn't opportunity, so their kids left because they wanted their kids to have better opportunities.
Better opportunities. So we suffered that same thing. So, I mean, progressive African-American young people, like my daughter lives in Houston, and I was trying to get her to come back.
Right.
Now, no, don't.
Right.
You know.
So, I mean, I understand that it's not sour grapes, because.
It's not sour grapes.
No, because you also have done, but it parlays the problem with Joshua Works, because that relationship, what you did was you created a relationship with the developers of Electric Works, that they were going to give a certain percentage of the contracts to minority, women, veteran-owned businesses, right? But I know for a fact
we built the program for that.
And you got funding for that. But the problem,
no, we did not get the funding. We were supposed to get the funding for that, and that contract was
because part of the problem, from what I understand, is because I was involved in doing some research, looking for these companies like that could take on these commercial. And the truth is, there aren't minority, women, or veteran-owned construction companies, plumbing companies that could do a commercial job. And also, what was happening is
that's not true.
No, but they had the problem. Then when they found them, they couldn't do the bid because they didn't, and so the bids weren't. So then they said, well, they're not qualified.
But that has been the challenge. We've been hearing that ever since we were.
But that's why you really created this program.
That's why I created the program, so that we could empower.
But I thought you were going to get, Chuck Surak gave you $150,000, right? And Ambassador gave you $20,000. Wasn't that to create the pre-apprenticeship program in the construction trades?
No, Chuck didn't give us $150,000 for that.
Okay.
He gave Joshua's hand a 3-year, $50,000 a year grant.
Oh, so not for Joshua Works.
No, it wasn't for Joshua
So you didn't
Works.
get the funding for Joshua Works.
Never got the funding for Joshua Works. We spent like $45,000 out of our own budget to build that program, and we ended up not getting the contract.
And there's and I don't think I mean I'm glad that we're having this conversation because none of this has been discussed anywhere. And I understand this is not, you're not pointing fingers, and you're not
pointing fingers
because
here's what Romans 8:28 says: all things work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to His purpose. So I don't believe anything that God means for you to have, nobody can keep that away from you. So there has to be a lesson in it somewhere that has to be learned, and there's a lot of things that are unfair. Life is just
but I sort of feel
life is
like
just unfair.
I know, but I sort of feel like, okay, enough with telling me that you're going to learn something from every failure and new struggles, and it's going to mean more. For once, you're sort of like, can I just have a break? It's sort of like there's an old Yiddish saying, "Man plans, God laughs." So I'm sort of like, all right, God, I get it. You've got a sense of humor, but knock it off. I need you to be by my side, giving me a break.
I have those kind of conversations with God, but at the end of the day, He always wins. And we have to figure out, how do we adjust to the way life has happened.
Right. So
and it was heartbreaking. I'll be transparent with you. I went through, it had a lot to do with me deciding.
Because you put your livelihood for
to be done. I couldn't find the strength to continue. Right. I really couldn't find the strength to continue. But I didn't wish any ill will on anyone.
No,
because when I got into this, I had to remember that when I got into this, my main objective was to spawn socioeconomic development in the Southeast, because it wasn't happening on a large enough.
So we could say then that this Village Premier and like Sharon Tucker's Pace and the other developments, so in a sense,
it's still the fruit of my labor.
It's still the fruit of your labor. It's just not your literal.
It's not.
You're not the carpenter.
I'm not the carpenter, and I can be grateful that God used me at a certain point
or maybe you were able to get the city to realize the vision.
To realize the vision that something
sort of
needed
like,
to happen.
well, like I told you that when we started talking, and I said that in Judaism for Moses, the story of Moses is really about a parable about disappointment.
Yeah.
And when you have a vision and you have something and you're working towards it and you wish for this to happen and it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And you've got to sort of shift and pivot, and what do you do with the disappointment?
I realized that my time was up. I realized,
So you're more and more like Moses. You're now going to be Moses to me.
Not necessarily. Moses went up in the mountain and died.
Yeah, okay.
I'm going to Houston to live.
Okay, good point. Yeah, but are you concerned? Do you think that Joshua's hand is going to continue, or do you think?
I certainly hope that it will. We're doing everything we possibly can to. We took a couple of blows that caused us to lose some support that we should continue to have because, right before the pandemic, we built 25 homes throughout throughout Fort Wayne, actually in the community that our mayor grew up in. We built about 4 homes over there, and all those homes are occupied. We provide supportive services for 150 families where our LIVE program that came out of my hurt, learning, investing, valuing, and expecting, where we are helping where we teach people to learn their significance and how to invest in those things that help them be their best. That's their faith, family, fitness, and finances.
It's like they find their strengths.
That 700 Club that we have. We're bringing
that's
people,
with Heather Presley Count. Yeah.
No, that's not Heather.
Oh, that's a different club.
We are the 700 Club. That's a spinoff of what we put together. 700 Club.
Because that's the basic credit score you need.
We have worked hard to help people build
a lot
their
of people
credit to
are building on it, sort of.
A lot of people are building on it,
but it's hard.
And the one thing that I'm not going to do, I won't sit back and let people, just steal all of the credit for things that we've done.
Right.
Because True North, they've come in, and they are taking us through. Follinger, they have funded us to do some strategic planning and development, redevelopment.
Right.
So we've got new leadership. We're planning to bring new leadership. The next leader that comes in for Joshua's hand, he's going to have skill sets that I did not have.
Right.
Even if I stayed, I was still going to have to.
Well, there's a lot of truth. There is a time.
Resign.
Right. Well, there is a time when the founder
has to move.
Can no longer be the CEO.
Can no longer be the CEO.
But the other issue is that when something is so ingrained in the founder and the vision, when you lose that,
you have to let it go.
Right.
You have to let it go, and so I find myself doing now what I had hoped my father would have done then.
Is to place the hand on somebody else.
The thing is that he didn't have anything else to turn to. I do.
Because you're entrepreneurial.
I learned a lot, and I don't, and the burden of leadership has been heavy, and I can feel the weight of it now. And so that's not good for my people. It's not good for the community. And it started affecting the way I saw things. And the Lord brought a young man into my space who's my successor, taking over our church. And we're going to be announcing the new name of the church this Sunday. I can't do it here. We're going to announce it at the picnic Sunday. But we've merged 2 churches. He's a young man. His name is Pastor Bryson Sharp. His wife's name, Monique Sharp. They started Kingdom Builders Ministry about 2 years ago. They have a little over 100 people in their ministry, and we have about 150, almost 200 people in our ministry.
That's healthy.
And we are our average age is 40 and over. Their average age is 40 and under.
So that's, again, those 2 generations.
So we bring those 2 generations together.
So there's a lot of parallels.
A lot of parallels, and we have, over the last 90 days, we've been in the transition process. And September 1st is my official retirement day. Right. And the 12th is my celebration. But we have been merging the churches, the systems, all month. This month he's preaching. Last month I preached last month, my last series. And the first Sunday I'll preach my last sermon at the church. And we have been on Wednesday nights doing organizational development with the 2 churches.
That's great.
To find out which gifts are the best in what area.
Right.
And I feel really good about who we're handing the ministry over to. He is a fireball man of God. He is devout. He's strong. you know,
I can't wait to
he's
find out who it is.
articulate. Yeah, his name, like I said, his name is Bryson Sharp, and he is, and I see Joshua's Temple, well, the name will later on,
Right.
but I see the legacy moving to do way more than I ever thought I could have ever achieved.
Well, there's also everybody sort of, you can only do things to a point, and maybe you had to open the door so
Yes.
someone else could go through it.
Yes.
Or, you know, so maybe, but let me ask you though, so when you look back, what do you think is the biggest lesson that through all of this that you learned or that you wish you would have known sooner? Or
I would not have allowed myself to get involved in the politics of it all. I just, you know, as I share with Bryson, you know, love God, love your people, grow them, empower them to be inserted into the community, and don't become, you know, let the politics handle politics, and you be a man of God.
okay, but in truth, part of what you probably needed to do was get involved in the politics because you needed to manage that so that, you know what I'm saying? Like,
Probably so. I mean, it was probably my lot. I probably needed to be naive enough, because God has to use naive people.
right.
Sometimes, you know, people who.
Well, it's like the greater fool.
Yeah, the greater fool. People who think they know what they're doing and
Right,
don't really know what
right,
they're doing.
right.
God can use them
Right,
as well
right.
and get great things done when you look back and you learn to be grateful for what He
Right.
has done. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I see, you know, now as I share with him, and that's the reason why we're looking for a new. We have an interim that's taking over Joshua's hand. He's our business development person, and that's Ramon Wright, a business mind. He's going to take over interim while we go through the strategic redevelopment. I'm going to stay on the board.
Okay, so you're still going to stay
I'm gonna
involved
stay on
in
the-
Fort
I'm
Wayne.
gonna- I'm gonna be on the board. I'll just be in Houston, but I'll be on the board.
Yeah, but you can
and
commute there.
I will be able to support where the vision is concerned. But we're looking for that next leader who's primed in community development, where housing is concerned, tax credits, who understand the social political,
Who understands the politics,
who knows how
navigate the
to
system.
navigate the system, who's not at the church, you
Right.
know, and
Right.
you don't have, and that pastor can continue to be the pastor, and that person can do that, and so Pastor Bryson can partner.
So that they work
They
alongside,
can work
parallel.
alongside each other, and the church will provide the spiritual, volunteers, all of that to make sure that the social economic picture, Joshua's hand, is pushed forward. When there's no one else to help, the church will be there
Right.
to make sure that it's programmed. And that's pretty much, I have to give it up to Joshua's Temple, not being a large church. I will give it up to them, and I need to shout out to them that even though we've got funding from different places, there's a lot of funding that we did not get that we probably should have gotten. But Joshua's Temple, those people, they filled the gap. They paid bills when Joshua's hand couldn't pay bills. They carried business when Joshua's hand couldn't carry business. And they filled the gap, and they allowed me to get out and navigate and do whatever I needed to do, you know, to get Joshua's hand where it's supposed to be. And I'm just hoping that folks will not lose confidence in Joshua's hand, because not only did it do an amazing work,
It continues.
it continues to do an amazing
and
work.
maybe it has to just do it in a different way.
Just has to do it in a different way, you know.
It's just, again, it's just like Moses.
Yeah.
God said that he needed someone who could lead the people in a different way.
Exactly.
Because getting to the promised land is very different than what you need to do to exist and survive,
And survive
in the promised land. Right.
And so the foundation is laid now, you know, and Joshua's hand, it knows how to do what it does now. It knows where it's going, how, you know, affordable housing and workforce development. That's it. Nothing else, because if a person has, if a person understands their craft, they understand their significance
And their worth.
and their worth,
And their value.
And their value, and they have a good job.
And then they have a means to make a living, and then they can, get a house.
They can buy a home, they can
Right.
start building wealth, and then they become stakeholders in the community.
Right.
And we teach them what that means to be a stakeholder in the community as a homeowner. No one else owns more of this community than you do.
Right, it's your community.
It's your community, and we just want people to understand how, and not to wait on other people to make investment. Learn how to make small investments, even if it's $10 a month,
Right.
$25 a
Right.
month to support organizations like
Well, the smallest act
the smallest
has the greatest
has
impact.
the greatest impact.
Right.
And organizations like Joshua's Hand are necessary in communities like this because people need to see organizations from their community doing the work in their community and not always waiting on somebody else to do it for them.
Well, I think that's a very important point, and I thank you for being so candid and frank and really honest about it. And
Well, that's the one thing that people can never say. They can never say that I haven't been honest and transparent about everything. I have a long, huge story. You know, I'm writing a book now.
I was going to say, I hope you write some of the lessons learned. I think that it should be called Walkerisms, though. I've given you, and each chapter should have a Walkerism as the chapter head.
You know what? That may be prophetic.
So there you go.
That may be prophetic.
And that could be ode to your dad,
yeah,
too.
it will be. You know, I get to go, I tell you what, as we get ready to close, I get to go now and to do ministry on a whole different level.
Right. And
What I've been
ministry
doing
today needs to be done differently.
Yeah, what I've been doing lately, I've been Ubering. And
so you've been meeting people. So you're actually, well, that's like your own, like you get them there, they're in your car. They can't go anywhere.
You know, and I get to minister, I get to serve people. You know, all of my clients, I get out and open the door for them. And they're like, are you opening the door for me? Yes, I am opening the door for you because everybody deserves to be served. At some point in time, feel good about yourself. Right. Everybody.
And I guarantee you have more impact because everybody who you did that for, they're telling somebody. You won't believe what this Uber driver did for me. And so what you're doing is also that passing it, paying it forward.
And passing it forward.
So your ministry it's just going to be in a different way.
I've been able to refer people to the Joshua Works program.
Right. See?
We've made more corporate connections. So when we get to Houston, you know, we'll get a chance to really get out there and get to know people.
And you know the best way to start. Start by being an Uber driver.
That's it.
So there you go.
Right.
So at the end of each And Good Company program, I ask guests the same 12 questions that were popularized by French novelist Marcel Proust.
Okay.
So what is your favorite word?
Courage.
What's your least favorite word?
Fear.
What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Being creative, opportunity for creativity.
And what turns you off creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Locked up gifts and talents.
What noise or sound do you love?
Music.
What sound or noise do you hate?
Chaos.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Wow. You know, I'm on a journey for that now. So I wish I could answer that.
Okay. Well, here's the other one. What profession would you not like to do?
Politics.
Because it's just as important. Well, maybe,
Politics.
But maybe you should do politics because maybe you've learned. Well, I'm not supposed to. I'm not supposed to editorialize here. What do you consider your greatest achievement?
My greatest achievement, recovering from alcohol abuse.
Who, living or dead, would you most like to have a conversation with?
My father, who's dead. Who I like to most have a conversation with, who's living. Bishop T.D. Jakes.
How would you like to die?
Peacefully in my sleep.
If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
You've done what I appointed you to do.
Well, I want to thank you for coming and talking, and I do hope when you come back to visit with Fort Wayne, you can share with us some more of your Walkerisms and these pearls of wisdom. So
yes,
I really appreciate it, and it's been a pleasure. I wish I would have gotten to know you before, now that you're leaving.
Yes. Hey, thank you, Sarah, for the opportunity, and I debated on whether or not I knew some questions would come. People have been asking me questions. I've had a couple of people interview, and I wouldn't give any comments or what have you, because I don't want anybody to feel like, I'm leaving town angry, or because I'm not.
Right, and truthfully, the whole point of this program,
yes,
this is the reason I did it, was that this isn't a soundbite. It's not taking out of context. It's a conversation and giving you an opportunity to have a seat at the table and tell your story. So I thank you for your honesty. I really appreciate it. And this interview is the reason I started this program.
I appreciate it, Sarah.
And you can learn more about And Good Company and all the other smart and compelling conversations we have had at andgoodcompany.info. And we look forward to next week when you can again enjoy a seat at the table for great conversation and good company.